Okay, there we go. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we start. First of all, we would love to ask any of you on the line who feel comfortable with this to turn your videos on. We are going to be talking about how to make systems more inclusive, where people feel heard and seen. And so we want to make sure that you can feel heard and seen in this session as well. So feel free to do that. That said, and not to sound contradictory, but we will ask people to keep their mic muted just during the presentation part of this session, just to preserve audio quality. But we welcome not only to send any comments or questions throughout the session via the chat function, but also we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. And at that point, we do want to hear all of you. So we invite you to unmute yourselves at that point. So the plan for today is to start with Tris. He's going to give us an overview of, what is stakeholder voice, why is it important, and what is the risk of not including it. I will show you also how Iris Plus can help integrate stakeholder voice into decision making in a more systemic way. And then Kat is going to show us in practice what does the gathering of stakeholder voice look like in practice, and how do you integrate that into decision making. And then we're really excited also to have perspectives from Acumen and Box. So they both are going to share from the investor angle as well as the enterprise angle, their perspectives. You're done. And sorry, that's a kid who should not be in my room. And finally, we're going to open up to Q&A. So with that, Tris, I'm going to pass it on to you. Wait, Tris, we can't hear you. Wait, you need to unmute yourself. Let me do it from here if you can. Wait a sec. Okay, Tris, try again. Oh boy. There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you, Leticia. Hi, everyone. Yeah, delighted to be with you here today. And I think my job is just to kick things off and hopefully get you thinking a little bit about why stakeholder voice is so important to incorporate in your work and in your practice. And then Leticia to show you how Iris Plus can help, and Kat to go into some of the detail of how that works in practice. But I suppose actually, I was reflecting on this and why it's important, so important right now, and I'm going to get into that. But I think we have kind of a double challenge and opportunity right now. I think because all of us in this unprecedented way are, here we all are in our houses joining this session with our lives around us, our children in some cases, our lives and our work kind of mesh together. We're all part of this as participants, not observers. And that really is an unprecedented thing. So when I talk to philanthropists and investors, and I'm talking to them about the outcomes that they're trying to make a difference to, the groups of people that they're trying to benefit through their investment resources, it feels like there's some connection, that there's some universality to all of this, which is great in terms of that passion and commitment. And at the same time, I want to suggest a little bit that we are not necessarily the best people at understanding how our investments, our products, our organizations actually work in practice when it comes to our customers. So 3 little concepts that I want to talk about initially. The first is power and where our power stems from. Now, this is from some of NPC's work on power dynamics, which was published in the last couple of months, aimed at really at a philanthropic sector, but equally applicable in the impact investment space. And it talks about wealth and independence as the source of a lot of people's power as investors, as philanthropists, connected to status, privilege, access, information, and so on. These are all important, but not novel things. But the thing that I would really like to focus on there is the old expression, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And I heard that as a child, I'm sure many of us did, have grown up thinking that that can't possibly be true, and it must be about the information that we have and not who we know. And yet, what I want to suggest is that those with power have the access to be able to turn that information into something that really has traction in the world today. Whereas many of the customers of the products that we might be investing in don't necessarily have the access to make their voices count. So I think that's one of the things that we're talking about today, is that people with the right stories to tell don't necessarily have the channels to get those voices heard. And through the work of 60 Decibels and others that you'll hear about today, and through Iris's work around Iris Plus around stakeholder voice, you can incorporate those important perspectives. But then second, I'm very grateful to a good friend who's an investor who talks about the three characteristics from his perspective of good investors. Very simply, they know the markets that they play in, they back the team, and they take risks. I think those are things that we will all agree with. You can be a specialist investor to know the market that you operate in, or you can trust intelligence that tells you about that market. To back the team, again, you can have a great deal of knowledge about what an organization requires, or you can fund in the way that is most flexible and adaptive. To take risks, you again may trust the organization to take risks for you, or you may be a specialist. But all of those three attributes rely on information. And yet, what I present on the right-hand side of this slide is some real challenges to having the right information. So I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with the idea of the filter bubbles in which we operate. That illustration is a network diagram showing political discourse around certain issues. So it's a real mapping from Twitter, and it shows the kind of bubbles that we operate in. We are connected to those who have the same opinions as us and who reinforce our opinions. In other words, for us to find things out that challenge our opinions, it's very hard. So obvious, but I wanted to make that point. Second, something that I'm sure people will have seen coming up in and around the conversation about machine learning technology and algorithms, which is the bias that we have in our algorithms because of the data that we feed them. So this illustration is actually from a Google project which is trying to reduce algorithmic bias, but is showing that at different levels, the data that you feed an algorithm will reinforce the preconceptions that are already in that data. So if you think that you will see doctors in white coats wearing stethoscopes and being male, then that is something that the algorithms will reinforce because those are the pictures that we have. And that's a pretty innocuous example, but obviously that comes into our understanding of many, many different things and how we teach machines how to understand the world. My point here is that we are algorithms. We are pattern recognition machines, and we are doing exactly the same in our daily life. And as we're understanding how to be good investors, how to know the markets that we operate in, how to back the team, and how to take risks, we are using our own bias and the training data that is fed to us, which is our experience, to interpret those signals. So my point, if it's not clear enough, is that we're not the customer, but we project from our own experience as though we are. And even if we acknowledge really strongly that we are not the customer and we want to be the best investors possible, then we must have those voices, constituent voices, stakeholder voices, to inform and give us that information. So to move on into the next slide, what happens if we don't incorporate the right voice? So this chart that you see is actually possibly, from my 16 years of working at MPC, the most shocking graphic that I have. Might not look like it right now, but this is actually from real data from non-profits operating in the criminal justice sector, so working in and around prisons to reduce recidivism. in the UK. This is real data that comes from government. I'd be more than happy to share details of an initiative called the Justice Data Lab. It's run by the UK government, and NPC helped to establish it. But what you see on that chart is actually a plot of the number of organisations that have been assessed, and that's on the y-axis, against their impact on recidivism, and that's on the x-axis. So further towards the right of that chart, that's a positive impact, that's reducing reoffending. Towards the left-hand side, that's a negative impact, which is increasing reoffending. And so what we see is that actually there is the mean is a reduction in reoffending of around 2 percentage points, and that's good. This work is hard. But what it also shows is that about 25% of the population of organizations working in this space from these data look like they're making things worse. And I'll just give a brief dramatic pause there, but this is not our assumption about most of the things that we invest in and the things that we resource. It's not our assumption that if we talk to a person going into a program within a prison or coming out of a prison, and we say that we're an investor in that, that there's a 1 in 4 chance that we might be making things worse. We aren't necessarily accountable unless we have good data there. And someone sharing that it is their assumption there, absolutely. Some of us, some people on the course, certainly many of us may assume that actually we start from a point where we have to prove that we do no harm. But my point is that stakeholder voice is incredibly important as one of the aspects of understanding our impact so that we can be accountable. And so we do often lack key data. We have incorrect assumptions, and my claim there, my hypothesis is that because we project so strongly from our own experience, there is a very significant danger that we interpret data that we see in ways that fit with our pattern recognition, with our algorithms already, and that we reinforce our biases unless we challenge those with other perspectives. And that's why it's so important that you don't listen to me, that you listen to the customer. It's really enough from me to kick things off. I think we can then move into talking about, how we make this stuff real.
Thank you, Tris, so much. Always such a pleasure to hear you. If you're anything like me, I would imagine you have so many questions for Tris. So we will open up to Q&A at closer to, not the end, but in a little bit. In the meantime, I do invite you please to send any questions as they pop up in your head through the chat box, and so we'll have them there and we'll start reading them when we get to Q&A. And so, as Tris said, we really cannot live in a world where we're not incorporating stakeholder voice in an ongoing basis. This is not something we do just at the beginning or we do just at the end. It's something that we have to do consistently, and that's the way we operate. And so, as we were evolving Iris to Iris Plus, this was one key consideration that we had, and we really wanted to make sure that we were bringing stakeholder voice to be key and integrated and in a way, systematic for anybody using Iris Plus. And so what we did is that we incorporated 2 stakeholder voice related metrics to every core metric set in Iris Plus. So as you probably know, Iris has, a long catalog of metrics that is very comprehensive, but it also offers these core metric sets. And the core metric sets basically are your short list of key metrics that you can use. They're available in different themes and whatnot. And so what we did, as I was saying, we incorporated 2 metrics, so I'll show you in a minute, to each core metric set. And the objective of this is really to make it systematic, so that any investor or any enterprise or any advisor, consultant using Iris Plus, they will always see these metrics in their core metric sets and will trigger them to then be managing and monitoring this on an ongoing basis. As you all know, IMM can be a practice that might seem technical or very data oriented, but at the end of the day, what IMM is trying to do is trying to answer a very human question, which is, what is the impact that people on planet are feeling, and is that what they wanted? Is that what they need? And the only way we can know that and answer that is by listening to their voices and bringing their voices into our decision making. And so the two metrics that we have in every core metric set, one is under the what, and it refers to the importance of outcomes to stakeholders. For those of you familiar with the 5 dimensions of impact, this is right aligned with the 5 dimensions. And basically what this is trying to understand is, is the outcome that the intervention or the investment is trying to pursue, how important that is to the stakeholders. Is this something that they consider actually to be very important or not so much? And then the other metric that we also have in every single core metric set relates to stakeholder engagement. And so in this case, it looks at whether stakeholders are engaged in the design, development, and delivery of a product or service, and whether your stakeholder is a client, a patient, a student, a supplier, an employee, whoever that is making sure that they are, throughout the entire process, being integrated, and their considerations are being integrated in the entire process of designing, developing, and delivering a product or service. So that's in every core metric set. And then you can also customize your core metric sets and add more, or you can look at the IRIS catalog of metrics where we have other stakeholder related metrics. For example, client satisfaction ratio. This is a metric that looks at, it's very similar to the Net Promoter Score, which I know 60 Decibels used too. Client income, really looking specifically from the client's point of view, whether your income is increasing or decreasing or whatnot. So there's a number of other metrics there that I invite you to explore. But really, again, our objective was to make sure that we can systemize this as much as possible, so that incorporating the voice of stakeholders is, it's the way we do it, and there's no other way. And so finally, I'll point to one more thing on IRIS Plus, and that also to help advance this important topic. About a year ago, Tris, we worked on this guidance piece. So again, this was just before we launched IRIS Plus. When we were launching, we wanted to make sure that we had a resource that talked about how to incorporate stakeholder voice, because it's so important. So we partnered with Tris and also with Genesis Analytics from South Africa to provide some guidance, really practical on, what is stakeholder voice, why you should do it, and how to incorporate into decision making. But so with that, I'm actually thrilled to now pass it on to Kat, who's going to show us in practice what does this look like. So Kat, let me make sure you are unmuted first. Or can you unmute yourself? If not, I'll do it from here.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. And thanks, Tris and Leticia, for the great framing and sort of highlighting the why of stakeholder voice. I'm going to talk through a little bit about the how of how to do it. I'll do a real quick intro to 60 Decibels, but it looks like I know some of you, so hopefully I can make that quick. I'll share how we think about some of our data collection, which might be helpful, and give a quick overview of different ways to actually get the data and the voices, because it's great for us to talk about how important it is to have stakeholder voice, but we know sometimes the biggest barrier is actually getting it in the first place. So could we click over? Thank you. Thank you. So many of you know, but just a quick overview, because it might be helpful to frame kind of the role we play in the ecosystem, I suppose. 60 Decibels have been around for a year, but we've been operating for many more years as the lean data team within Acumen. You might know us in our former name. We spun out last year as an independent entity, and really what we do is focus on customer insights and impact. And so we support impact investors and funders and foundations, social enterprises and NGOs to really understand their end users or beneficiaries, and hopefully to use it to improve or maximize impact. So we mostly do that through remote surveying with stakeholders. We predominantly use mobile phone surveys to conduct interviews, and that's how we collect the data. And we do that through a local research team of over 280 research assistants across 35 countries of the globe. So they all speak directly to the end users, speaking local languages, and making sure that they're locals of the countries they're interviewing in. So of course you introduce different biases, but to Tris's point, the idea is that we're using people who are locally based, they're contextually, culturally, and kind of language proficient, which is really important. And we tested lots of key questions to help collect all these insights over time. And that's enabled us to standardize a set of questions. And so we're going to go through that a little bit, but that's one of the key things around how to do this well and how to integrate, is identifying what the key indicators are, standardizing those, and that enables tracking over time and benchmarking, which is one of the things we've done. And we focus, another massive learning point, focus on turning all that complex data into really beautiful, accessible results. So next slide, thank you, Leticia. So just to talk through a little bit to get the data to inform decisions and integrate voice. The first thing is, of course, determining what the indicators are and what we want to track, and therefore the questions that we need to get this information. So we've got Alberto speaking in a little bit, but one of the ways Acumen thinks about impact, which I think might be really helpful for framing, is across 3 different dimensions. They look at breadth of impact, so how many people are being reached. They look at poverty focus, because Acumen focus very much on investing in companies that serve low-income customers. So that's how many people, but who they are as well. And then a third dimension, which is notoriously difficult to do, and we kind of specialize in, around depth of impact, and Tris mentioned as well. Sorry, Leticia, you did with the indicators. So it's not just how many people and who they are, but how transformative or impactful that product or that service or that intervention is. And that's really shaped how we've built our work. And so as we try to capture real understanding across the board, incorporating positive and negative impacts, I mean, often impact measurement focuses or is assumed to focus on positive. Hopefully it's net positive, but often we can skip or understanding kind of experience, which might need some improvement or some adjustments. So just to talk through very quickly to give examples, so we capture data on the end user profile. So who are your customers? What income do they live at? What gender are they? We look at acquisition in terms of how did your beneficiaries first hear about you, your product or your service? What was their motivation to sign up or to purchase? And are there other alternatives in the market, and how do they compare? We explore experience, so how satisfied end users are and what drives this. What challenges do they face? And how well are companies supporting them to resolve those challenges? So to emphasize Tris's point earlier, it's key to capture the negative as well as the positive. And we look at impact in terms of depth of impact. So has the intervention improved the quality of life of families? Does it affect their well-being, their ability to earn an income, to support their family, or whatever it is the goal of your NGO investment kind of strategy is? And one thing that's really key here is that we allow customers to define impact for themselves. It can be really easy to sit in an office in London and make a log frame and decide this is what impact is. But what's really important is hearing through the voice of your stakeholders and understanding what's most valuable and what's most important to them. So we tend to do a real mix of questions that have sort of closed-ended and open-ended, which is also much more fun for a respondent, but you get this real richness of insight around what's really important and what customers or end users talk about. Just to say explicitly, I'm kind of interchangeably using end user, respondent, customer, beneficiary. Essentially, lead data which is what we do, as an approach to how you collect this data. And so in a way, the terms don't matter so much. Of course, there's nuance in terms of how you deliver, but it's not so critical here. And so lastly, we look at retention. So what ideas do users have for improvements for products or services that better meet their needs? And so you can see some of these questions or indicators serve a really nice dual purpose of providing customer insights and impact insights. So in many ways, it's more about the language than anything else. You know, customer value proposition is synonymous with impact or benefit, but might be a term that those different terms resonate differently with different kind of stakeholders. So this framing really helps us to determine the what of what we need to collect. And so then heading back to the why in a way, these are a few options to consider, and I'll quickly whiz over them. And I should have actually moved SMS up one. And then by cost, complexity, and time, the methods are pretty much ordered in ascending order. Wait, tops the most cost-effective, time-effective. And so online tends to be the cheapest way to deliver surveys, but it's only appropriate for certain audiences, and response rates tend to be quite low. So the proportion of people who complete a survey or a questionnaire versus those that you sent it to. SMS comes next in terms of sort of cost and ease, but of course language and literacy can be a bit of a challenge. So just like for online, response rates don't tend to be so high, and you can only really ask 3 to 5 questions, otherwise people definitely get bored. And then unlike, you can't really ask some of these qualitative questions because people don't tend to spend ages writing a long response. IVR, which is integrated voice response, so recorded voice. It's one option, helpful from a literacy point of view, but we've not seen too much success. And I'm going to skip ahead to in-person, so I end up on phone. So this one's really good for in-depth interviews, for when you want to do observation. It can be very costly and time-consuming, and sometimes difficult to arrange logistically. Right now, of course, that's not even an option, so that's important. And then the last one is phone, and that's what we predominantly do, and it provides a really nice cost and time-effective way to reach out to people. You can ask more questions than you can in most of the other survey types. And the other thing we found is that the anonymity that a phone interview offers enables end users or customers to answer really openly and honestly, so you tend to get really accurate, honest information around what's working and what's not working. And that's ultimately what's really valuable. We want insights to inform what we do, hopefully, rather than, you know, tick a box to send a beautiful impact report to our donors. I'm sure we want it to do both, but that's key as well. And one last just quick thing on that is a consideration of who does the data collection, because of course there can be different biases you might introduce by doing it in-house versus independent versus all sorts of other things. Thanks, Leticia. So I wanted to briefly go back to the what, I suppose, the what to do with this data and how to make it valuable. I'm going to share a few examples of how we've used and presented data to inform decisions. And we've also got our 2 special guests from GIIN and from VBox to share their experiences at the end. I will stop talking soon. So next slide, Leticia, thank you. So data's great, but it's really what you do with it that counts. And that's what informs, drives action, leads to adjustment and improvement. And so the first thing that's key is having a clear plan at the outset. What do you want to understand? And it helps avoid collecting data you're not really sure what to do with. Standardization helps too, I mentioned, so it enables us to track over time, to compare across portfolios, countries, or products. And keeping it simple and accessible is important. You know, what are the key takeaways? Who is your audience? What's most relevant to them? What ideas might your board, your sales team, your management team have for improvements or different perspectives on kind of how to use the results and drive action? So it's about moving from descriptive to actionable data or analysis, and a few examples just coming. And I can share some examples, but actually let's click over to the next slide. Thank you. So this is one of the examples of how we present data to some of our partners. So this is kind of a snapshot, the exact summary in a way. And the idea is that if someone doesn't have time to read a whole report, all the key information that's critical for whoever this stakeholder group is here. So first thing is, what's the most important indicators for you? And so this is where benchmarking can be helpful. So those little circles at the bottom of each indicator, we use that for benchmarking across portfolios or sectors, but it could be used to show change over time. Are indicators getting better or worse? And a way to turn data into something with a bit more context. So next slide is another. We released a report in February, hopefully you've seen it, but what we did is created an impact index to help put things into context. So the outside triangle is maximum impact, the smaller the triangle, minimum impact or less. And the corners we use, so you will have seen Leticia just shared, we use some of the impact management project indicators. So you've got the who is poverty reach, the what is the quality of life indicator, and contribution is people's first access. Are we serving new customers? And so if you click on the next slide, this report was all about energy access. But what it's really doing is showing that it enabled us to map the average performance and impact of companies, but also present it for each different type of product or service. So we saw that solar lanterns, that's the purple triangle, they're having the biggest impact across those indicators, mainly because they're serving low-income populations or many families' first access to modern lighting, and therefore had a big impact on quality of life. But solar home systems, the yellow triangle, are providing really solid impact across the board, whereas appliances, which is the green one, it's a really new market. There's still lots of learning to do. The products are slightly more luxury, and so, of course, there's lots of opportunity for improvement and growth. And so that type of information can really help investors to determine where to deploy their capital to shape their portfolio, or where technical support might be helpful in helping companies, enterprises, or partners to kind of really reach those parts of those different populations that they're aiming to serve. And so another quick one, Letitia, so thanks. So we can turn this type of information at the aggregate or portfolio level into something even more insightful by, I'm going to show you in the next slide, but this is the Net Promoter Score that Letitia mentioned. It's used as a proxy for customer satisfaction and loyalty. So 100 is the best, minus 100 is the worst. And if you can go to the next slide, this is my last slide. So each company in our benchmark is a line here, colored by a type of product or service. And we found that ranking can be super helpful to see how companies are doing relative to their peers. So for us, we can start to identify what the characteristics of the highest performing companies, those on the right, what business models do they have, what policies or practices do they employ. And that's where data becomes actionable, because we can start to provide recommendations or ideas or considerations around to suggest to those doing not so well on the left of the chart that they might want to employ. So just a bit of a whiz through some of the how and some of the what, I suppose, of how we've presented some of the data. And then the most important thing, the next slide, is really to make sure that we hear some other perspectives of people really using it on the ground. So then we're going to jump to Q&A and discussion. And I know many of you are already doing lots of this already, so hopefully some of it was just some ideas or fuel some discussion. But first, I wanted to ask Alberto, who is Director of Portfolio at Acumen. He's really kindly said he'd be happy to share some of the experience as an impact investor on what stakeholder voice means to Acumen and how Acumen use this information.
Great. Thank you, Kat, and hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I hope everybody and their families are all well. This is really exciting, obviously for Acumen, who have been using lean data and now working with 60 decibels for, I would say, more than 5 years. It's great to see this growing, because it has been really valuable for us, not only to be able to understand the impact that we're causing, but also to make really important decisions within our portfolio companies. And so just a little bit of context before I jump into some actual sort of how we use it in some examples. Acumen's manifesto starts with a quote that says, it starts by standing with the poor, listening to voices unheard. And that's really embedded into the ethos of the way in which we operate as impact investors. And when we tried many different methodologies to measure impact throughout the years that we've been around, which is about 20, but we were never able to find sort of one that would allow us to get information in a fast, objective, quantitative manner that allowed us to really understand at an individual level, which is our core focus, people in poverty, how we were affecting these people's lives, how we were reaching them, and how could we improve that or maintain our companies aligned with that mission. And so it's very cliche, but we do believe that you can't achieve what you don't measure. And so in the same way as we measure operating and financial metrics, we measure impact metrics and embed those into our fund goals. They drive the carried interest of our funds. There's objectives that need to be met, etc. And so it's really embedded in our whole sort of ethos as an investor. And so just talking a little bit about the methodology, Kat explained how Acumen thinks about it. It's in these three broad buckets: breadth, how many people are we reaching; poverty focus, those people that we're reaching, in what poverty lines are they located. So this has been very useful also to compare sectors by sectors. We know, for example, that in energy access, about 30% of the customers are living with less than about $3 a day, and 60% are living with less than $6 a day. But in agriculture, you have a much smaller breadth of people that you can reach, but they're normally more, there's a larger percentage of people living in high degrees of poverty. And then the last metric, which is multidimensional and complex, which is depth. How are we improving their lives? How happy are they or satisfied with the product or service that they're receiving? How much is their income increasing? So really valuable information. And what is important, that even though the surveys are in part qualitative, or the responses can be qualitative, the aggregate of the responses allows us to get to quantitative information and data sets that really show us a big picture of what we are achieving. And we integrate it across all our investment process. So we worked actually very closely with Kat in developing also a framework to do it during due diligence, even before we invest. So that's much more agile and sort of a smaller sample size. So we can get sort of an understanding before we even do the deal, sort of what is this company achieving today? What can it improve? Or how do we sort of embed that into our impact thesis and what we'll be looking to influence as investors when we come into the company. And then once we have invested, we do these analysis every several or certain amount of years in each portfolio company to track their performance and their development over time as well. And that has allowed us not only to, as I mentioned, measure and manage the impact of our companies. And by managing, I actually mean actively being a voice that aligns our companies to maintain the course as they scale, which is something that a lot of investors, impact investors, are seeing as a challenge. How can I, as these companies are scaling, how can I know that they're not drifting away from their mission? And this has been a tool that has allowed us to monitor that. And then the other thing that we also use it actively for is, once you receive that information from your stakeholders, beyond sort of the impact, you also, as a company, as a manager, how you're reaching them, if they're satisfied with your product or not. And that can allow you to make not only impact decisions, but operational or strategic decisions around, how do I reach these customers? Is there a difference in how I reached a women customer versus a male versus a female customer? Do I need to design a different product or a different payment capability? And so it gives you a lot of real tangible information that has been very beneficial for a lot of our companies. And I'm going to provide just two quick examples. For example, in India, we have an investment, a productive use application company called Promethean Power Systems, which developed a technology to refrigerate milk in rural parts of the country. And so we understood through a lean data assessment that a lot of the customers of the company were actually, the poverty focus was below average. So we worked with the company to try to design new distribution channels to reach the customers that they were actually trying to serve. And as they started reaching those customers, also understand what sort of payment facilities they had to develop so that those customers could use these products. Another interesting one is we worked in Latin America in a coffee wet mill, getting feedback from farmers to gather insights on how the wet mill could actually serve them better. And we understood that even though the mill was offering higher prices for their cherries, it wasn't the ability, it was the ability to provide easier transport and convenience of transport that was the main motivating factor for the farmers to work with that mill. So we started to understand how the company which managed the mill could better partner and better serve their stakeholders by gathering this information. And so it's been really useful. I would say that we're running right now we have 95 active portfolio companies. and we're running anywhere between 30 to 40 lean data or 60 decibels projects during a given year. The scope and the duration of the projects varies depending on what we're trying to get. Some are very sort of punctual, and we're just trying to understand how much farmer income increased, or you could really tailor them to the type of information that you're trying to get to. But there's others that are much broader and can just give you a bigger data set of information. And finally, what we've also started to do is gather this information and produce impact reports on a sector by sector level. So we produced an energy impact report where we compared all of our energy companies in our portfolio. We're now working on an agriculture report, and we publish these externally, and we share our learnings to help other investors and companies sort of understand where we're seeing are sort of the drivers of impact and strategic decisions. And so it's been a really good tool for us, and we will definitely continue to work and partner with 60 Decibels in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alberto, for your perspective. Kat, we can hear you. No, you're mute. Wait, you're muted somehow. I can't unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you now.
Thank you so much, Alberto. And I actually think you sort of answered Lola's question around like what are the best practices for standardizing analysis across companies or projects while keeping the local context. And I think the answer is probably have a look at the impact reports. That's the way to standardize for each kind of individual project, ensures that it's genuinely valuable. So some of the examples that Alberto shared at a company level. So hopefully that kind of answers that a bit. But we wanted to make sure we had time for Amori at Bbox. So Amori is the Chief Marketing Officer, and Bbox are a social enterprise. So I'll let you introduce, but I'm looking forward to hearing your.
Wait, he might be muted.
Hello.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Kat, for giving us this opportunity to talk. As Kat said, my name is Amori. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Bbox. So just very briefly about Bbox. We're a next generation utility company, and we've been working for the last 10 years to try to solve energy poverty in Africa and South Asia. We have started doing other products for the last 2 years to kind of expand our reach. We started on clean cooking and mini-grids, and this is really based on customer insights that we've decided to kind of attack some of the biggest pain points of those customers. I want to talk to you about 3 parts where we use stakeholder voice in our decision meetings. First of all, as a group, then day-to-day on making decisions on our business, and then a little bit about the current situation in COVID. So first of all, as a group, for us, it's so important to really have this as a basis for anything that we do. And this is really what sets us apart probably from NGOs as a business, is that everything relies on our customers liking our service. Our products are actually quite expensive for our customers, and so we need to make sure that we really have an incredible value proposition for them. And interestingly, and I think this was mentioned earlier a little bit by a speaker from NCPC, we are designing a service for customers that are very different from us, and we really need to acknowledge this. I mean, me not being from any of our target country, but also all of the employees that are based in Rwanda are most of the time not going to be the target customer. So how do we bridge that gap and become a successful business that builds the products that customers really want? And this is really important to become profitable, but also to achieve our vision is to provide impact. And so we have an internal research team and data teams to really try to solve this. So this is really why, as a group, for me, it is important. In the second part on the day-to-day decisions that we take thanks to data. It can vary a lot. And a few of the examples where we've actually worked with Kat and her team using lean data survey are the following. So, for example, adapting to new markets, understanding what the needs are in the new market. So we've rolled out the new appliances based on the needs of other markets. For example, say in West Africa, there is a much bigger need for fans than anywhere in East Africa that we have seen. Second is in terms of customer experience and tailoring it and improving it little by little based on the feedback that we get from our customers. I think one of the things that 60 Decibels does really well is to be able to benchmark our company against other companies, and so to understand where we're good and where we're lacking in terms of our customer experience. And the third part is really in our effort to become a company that does more than solar. We've had to listen to a lot of customer insight. I wanted to touch base a little bit on the methodologies that we use at Dbox. We use different types of data and survey in order to get the most out of the customers. The fastest way to get data for us is really using the data that we already have. We have millions and millions of data points, even on a daily basis, probably, because all of our boxes are connected. We get daily to weekly payments from all of our customers, and we can, from that data, understand a lot of the situation for the customer. Obviously, this doesn't give us the color behind it, but that's the first step. We have the data team that analyzes the trend and sees if something goes wrong. And then afterwards, we start doing surveys. So this can be in person or on the phone, like we do with the lean data, with 60 Decibels on the lean data survey. And these are extremely interesting when you go from a just quantitative analysis to something that is qualitative, where the customer can express themselves and go a little bit beyond the question that is asked to them. So we really value that. And then the last method that we've been using for quite a few years is based on human-centered design. And so we use a mix of methods. It can be using cards that get prioritized about, let's say, the customer tells us what they value the most, and they will use cards to explain it in the audience. Or another example has been we used cameras that we give to customers in order for them to represent what they valued about our service. And then after a few weeks, we came and discussed the pictures that they took, and it was a very interesting, very insightful photo voice project that really distilled not just the quantitative part, but also the qualitative part. Then the third part I wanted to talk about is how does the data work for us in this time during the COVID-19 pandemic. So first of all, our first priority was obviously protecting our employees and then managing our cash flow. Now we're focused on really fighting back the virus and making sure that all of our customers get impacted the least amount possible, and we keep the lights on for that. So a few of the things that we have done is we saw that, so this is very important to not consider all of Africa or South Asia as the same. Every country at the moment of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so the impact on our customers is radically different. You will find Kenya that has a relatively small impact on sales because the lockdown is not 100% and it's just happening at night and it's more localized on the county level. Whereas Rwanda on the other side has a very strict lockdown and is impacting obviously the sales 100%, but also the repayments of our customers. So from the moment we saw that there was an impact on the repayments of our customers, we decided that we would roll out a few different trials and tools to help our customers. The first one was making the minimum payment to be switched back on to be smaller. And the second one was to create an incentive for the customers to pay now while they still have a little bit of savings and get bonus energy. That means that the customer gets more for their money than normally. So this is some of the things that we have done. Right now in the second phase, we need to assess the impact of those different tools. And that's what we're starting right now. And then other things we've done in terms of what should be our response, we've asked ourselves a little bit and asked our customers. And what we found out and what we're advocating with our government is really ensuring business continuity. So I think those are the main things. I'm sure you have a lot of questions for all the other speakers.
Excellent. Thank you very much, all the great speakers we had today. There's so much to say about this very important topic, and I know we're running short on time and we have a lot of questions, so I want to make sure we can tackle some of those. I also want to point out there's a lot of great resources out there when it comes to this topic. 60 Decibels has done a lot, NPC has done a lot, Feedback Loops has done a lot, SPTF also posted some work they have there. CDC has done work also on data collection. So lots of great resources out there to refer to. Maury, you were just talking about COVID, and there was a question about COVID as well earlier on. So Tris, on to you. What have you seen in terms of, different approaches that philanthropists are taking maybe in response to COVID? And you're muted, wait. There you go.
Great, thank you. Yeah, actually, what we're seeing is a combination of trying to give platforms to and listen to the right voices. So there's another organisation UK based who I hope might join us on this session, maybe on a future one, called On Our Radar, who do a great job of working from a kind of perspective of tech and journalism to give a platform to people to speak for themselves, which I think is fantastic. But then there's the question of who should be speaking. One of the things I'm concerned about at the moment is that a lot of funders and investors are moving through their existing networks, which is a set of kind of bias as well. So there's work going on to share data from non-profit services and social enterprises services pretty much in real time to understand what this outbreak looks like in terms of impacts on financial hardship, in terms of impact on domestic abuse, and so on. So I think, that's in another way kind of at the other end of this spectrum we've been talking about, and I love the work of 60 Decibels and understand the value to customers. If you then have social enterprises and non-profits with live data about their service and product usage, how that is evolving is part of the kind of the sensor grid that we can be tapping into at the moment if someone's prepared to step up and help host and kind of crowdsource that.
Awesome. Thank you, Tris. Another question back to you, Kat. What I'm trying to find it exactly, but it was something around how do you incorporate negative impacts into the rating? Wait, you're muted. Wait, there you go.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. I think our first run of it, essentially, we didn't incorporate, or rather, sorry, the indicators we used for the impact index were essentially on a 0 to 100% scale. It was one way just to make it kind of simpler to create an indice. And so I suppose anything that's 0% for an indicator was deemed like the least impact. So in a way, it was kind of no impact versus maximum impact rather than negative. So I think there's lots of playing around with different ways we've used to present the information with those like benchmarking bars, the ranking, the indexes. And I think it's often shaped by who we're working with in terms of what are the key indicators for them. So I think that's why the index is helpful to look at it in individual level, because that's where you can start to see how the different shapes of those triangles or whatever shape you might create shows where companies or interventions are doing better than others.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat. And on your, I think that the COVID-19 question was also for you as well. Any different approaches that you're seeing or in response to the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah. So just because it may be useful, we're doing quite a bit of data collection actually with end users, and we're going to put it on an online dashboard so that everyone can use it and it's accessible, because we know everyone is desperately trying to be useful at this time, and we hope that will help people navigate responses. In fact, Bbox are one of the companies that will be involved. So from a kind of a data collection point of view, we're paying a really close attention to how willing people are to talk to us. Interestingly, we found people are really happy, probably partly because they're at home and they want human connection, but we're really aware that this is a time where everyone is vulnerable, and you approach research with vulnerable people in a different way. It's more sensitive. You have to be really careful and thoughtful around how you sort of introduce ideas and collect data. So I think that's something we're really thinking about, making sure. I find a lot of the time data collection is incredibly extractive. It's about what can I get that's useful to me. And so some of what we try to do very much, and I know that Bbox and Acumen think about this a lot as well, is how do you close that feedback loop? And that's kind of a jargon term, but how do we make sure that there's real accountability, that there's real response and reaction? And I think that's where some of those more qualitative, open-ended questions are really helpful, and questions around how could this partner or company support you better at this time, and what are your needs or your desires right now, and how can we help?
Great, thank you. And I'd also like to say, I see, based on what you said, Kat, about publishing data, and Tris, you posted a link. Also, I just want to share at the GIIN, we're collecting and helping publish a lot of the different efforts that are happening around COVID-19. So if you'd like to send it to us, and we can be another channel to help, broadcast the different work that other people are doing, please do so. Kat, I know we have 1 more minute, so I'm going to just try to squeeze one more question, just because we have such great panelists. So one final question: how do you mitigate bias when analyzing the data, and do you involve stakeholders in making sense of their data?
Oh, that's a great 2 questions. So I think one of the first things we do is make sure we try to reduce, mitigate, avoid biases before you even get to analysis. So that's in the design of the questions, the sampling or selection of who you talk to, who it is that's collecting the data and how that's collected. So they feel like there's so many kind of steps before you get to analysis. And then what we do, our teams do the analysis in-house. We anonymize all customer or contact information. So you wouldn't know at an individual level, of course, whose data is what. And there, I suppose the answer is we try to reduce it through training and making sure our team are really good at what they do. And in some ways, it's really helpful us being an independent entity, because we don't really have an incentive to present really positive results, really negative results. Our core objective is to inform people we're working with, and therefore it's much easier to be objective, because we want to just present the most honest answers we can. And I think it can be difficult internally to reduce that bias, because naturally everyone wants to think and know that they're having positive impacts. But I think that might be one of the good things about us, talking to other partners, customers, because we can kind of detach ourselves in a little bit and really kind of be objective around what we're seeing and hearing. What was the second half of the question? Sorry, I don't think I answered it.
Do you involve stakeholders in making sense of their data?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose during data collection, yes. And so I talked a little bit about the qualitative feedback, and that's absolutely critical, because I think often if you ask quantitative or closed-ended or multiple choice types of questions, often you have no idea of the why behind it, you just know the what. And so nearly all of our questions have a follow-up open question, and that's where we sort of identify the person has understood this question, but we understand the why behind it. And essentially that is our way of making sure stakeholders are helping to shape our understanding of kind of what they're really saying and how they're rating certain sort of areas of impact, if that makes sense.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kat. Also, I see Veronica posted a comment saying, how important the work of 60 Decibel has been in helping them reach their customer base, which now, given social distancing, if you didn't have mobile data collection, you probably wouldn't have another way of doing it. So I know we're 2 minutes past the hour, and I also know there's some glitch with the calendar invite, and some people thought this was a shorter session. It wasn't. How could we possibly be talking about this important topic in less than an hour? But I want to thank all of you on the line. Thank you especially to Tris, to Kat, Alberto, and Maury. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us. There's so much more to talk about this topic, but we're really thrilled to have you here with us on the line. We'll be posting this webinar recording as well as the slides. And again, please keep any resources that are related to COVID. We'll be happy to help share them through the GIIN network. But anything else related to this topic, this should always be an ongoing conversation where we keep it. We always keep advancing on how we can incorporate the voice of those affected into decision making. So thank you all again one more time, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.